Hey everyone! I know, it's been quite a while since I worked on the little Unimog 421. I kinda had to put this project on pause for a bit as we were getting the old McGears ready, because suddenly I needed that and kinda had to make it a priority. But because all of that ended up working out completely differently anyway, I no longer have to rush that project, and now I can take the time to work on this as well. And I actually paused this at a bit of a dumb point, because there's really only a few little things left to do before this can start driving itself around again. So let's get back into it. Now, even though I've had a tarp covering this, it has been getting very dusty from all the other work that's been going on in here. You can see the outline of the tools that were in here. So I really think we need to finish up the interior so we can get the doors and windows back on this and get the cab closed off and keep the dirt out of it. A few things has happened since you last saw it. I've been getting the whole steering assembly in here. I just sanded that down and got it painted and all freshened up. But it's only loosely mounted, as well as many of the electrical components and all of the wiring up here. It's partially in place, but nothing is completely fixed where it's supposed to be just yet, because that's really where I had to leave the project. So I think that's where we're going to have to pick this back up, is to get all of this wiring mounted back in place. Then we can start mounting all the different components, make sure it's all connected and working as it's supposed to. And the very first thing I want to do is get my gauges and my switches and stuff mounted up here, along with all the wiring and stuff for that back here. Because all the stuff up under there is going to be pretty difficult to get to once I have my fuse panels and all the things mounted out here. So we might as well get all that out of the way first. And even then, there is one thing that we are going to be changing right away, and that is this here. This was the old indicator for the glow plugs. But if you remember, when we did a little bit to the engine, I also upgraded from the old resistor type series connected glow plugs to the newer non-resistor parallel connected glow plugs. Now that is a good upgrade, but it does also mean that this no longer works, because this is not really a light. It has a little resistor wire in here, and that just starts glowing red hot when the glow plugs are ready. But because the whole resistance of the entire system has changed, this no longer works with that. Now, it is possible to get some of these that do work with those new glow plugs, but there is quite a few different ones to pick between, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the exact resistance of this has to be for it to work with those plugs. And they are a little bit costly, so I don't want to try out 10 different ones. But to be honest, I don't even think it's worth the trouble, because the new plugs are that much faster. They only need like 5 to 10 seconds, so I'm not going to be using this for anything anyway. I can just count to 10 and we're good to go. So I'm just going to be deleting this. But what I am going to do instead is just add a little simple light. And there's already a hole right here that conveniently fits that. I'm going to wire that into the glow plug circuit, just to have some kind of visual confirmation that I am sending power to the glow plugs. Because, you know, the switch could be bad, or a fuse could be out, or something like that. So it is nice to have some kind of visual letting you know that the plugs are heating. Well, people, here we go. For the first time in all of the time that I've owned this vehicle, it now has lights on it. The headlights were already missing back when I got this, but I did have a set of original lights from the red Unimog, and we're probably going to do something different with that, so I figured these lights were intact enough that they would do well on this one. Although it's almost weird seeing it like this. I'm so used to seeing it without headlights. But not only are the lights mounted, they are also hooked up and working, because I got a little bit carried away and I ended up doing pretty much all of the wiring. I mean, there is still a few things left to connect, but that is stuff that is not here yet. But all of the important things should be hooked up now. Even the gauges have been hooked up, so we have lights in those as well. And we have parking light, we have the low beam headlights and the high beam headlights. And I even got the indicators working. Now they are blinking a little bit fast, but that's because I only have them mounted up here in the front. They're not mounted in the rear yet. You know what? Let's just check the engine stuff now that we're at it. So, a little bit of throttle and pull this out to the first step and I should get my little light coming on right there, telling me that I'm sending power to the glow plugs. So we're just gonna hold it there for 5-10 seconds, something like that. And let's go. I'm not going to run it for that long because I still don't have any cooling on it. Oh yeah, and that oil pressure, I'm pretty sure that's not correct because it is going pretty much all the way to the top of the gauge. I don't think we have that much pressure going on. I suspect the old sending unit down there is just not super accurate anymore, but at least it is showing me that it's building some kind of pressure, so that's good enough for me. Now, all of this wiring ended up taking quite a long time because I had to work out several issues along the way, and also change a few things and rewire some stuff and so on. But as some of you probably know, when you are dealing with these vintage vehicles that has this type of fuse in them, half of your electrical issues are going to be up here in the fuses. And most of those issues can be corrected simply by just wiggling the fuses a little bit. Because this is really not a very good type of fuse, because they only have this tiny little contact point at the very tip of the fuse here. And what typically happens, because these are usually mounted in a place where they are exposed to the elements, is that they start corroding right at this little contact point, and eventually you end up with a bad connection up here. Now, I already know that some of these are bad because if I touch them, I end up with some poor connections in my headlights. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. So I'm probably just going to go ahead and put all new fuses in this before I close it off. And another issue was the relay for the indicators. This old relay was just not doing its thing anymore. Now you can still get these, but I decided to just put a newer type of relay in a regular relay holder up under here. But while I was fiddling with that, I figured out that these lights in here, to show you that you are indicating, they are not working either. It has one for the truck and one for the trailer, but none of them work, and I think it's an issue with this gauge cluster. It is just not getting the power up to these little sockets that has the light bulbs in it. You could probably take this apart and fix it somehow, but I wasn't going to get into that because it wouldn't really work with the relay I was putting in there anyway, because it's not set up to run a single bulb in here. So I had to hook up one for both sides. So what I did was just quickly make a little holder for a couple of indicator lights in here. So now we have one for the left side and one for the right side. I just quickly 3D printed this little plastic thing and put a couple of little LEDs in it. And I deliberately made it so that it would fit in this spot right here, because there was a hole in the dash here anyway. Not a hole that was meant for anything specific. This hole is just for auxiliary equipment. So this is going to work just fine for me. Now, you might have also noticed that I did end up putting a different type of indicator on it. The original ones were some kind of like this that were mounted up here. But not only are these getting kind of hard to find, they are also getting really expensive because, to my knowledge, they have gone out of production quite a while ago, and they were never really used on very many vehicles, mostly just these old round cab Unimogs. So there's really not a whole lot of these left out there. And because we're not going super original anyway, I just picked a couple of these old style Hella lights. I think they suit it pretty well. And I mounted them down here as well because it wouldn't really work with the threaded holes up here, and also the wires were here. If you remember from some of the early videos on this, it actually had some of these big indicators, kind of like the Megears has, but I don't really like those, so I went with some slightly smaller ones instead. But everything is still just sort of loosely hanging around here, not looking terribly great. But that's because I need to mount some of all these stuff that goes underneath all of these wires before I get them all tied up and make it look nice. So I have to get my hydraulic tank in here, and also the hydraulic valve block and the brake cylinder and clutch cylinder, and a lot of pipes, and basically all the stuff that goes in this corner. So let's get right on with that. It's also going to be nice to get some of all these parts back on the truck so I can start clearing out this very organized corner over here. I think this is the one. Now, some of all these old parts, they are looking a little bit tired and a bit rusty and such, but really there's nothing wrong with it. It all works as it's supposed to, so it really could just go right back in the truck, but at this point it just wouldn't feel right to put a bunch of rusty components on it, so I am just going to be cleaning up some of these things and give them a fresh bit of paint just to at least make them look nice for the next couple of years. I should probably just say that I know I'm missing a big rubber boot that goes around this brake cylinder. I thought I had one, but apparently I don't. But it is going to take a while to get one, and I don't really want to stop everything I'm doing right now to wait for that. So we're just going to carry on. It's going to be easy enough to go in here and install it later on when I get it. I know we gave this a new clutch master cylinder back when we were initially getting it going, but somewhere along the line I stole that for the red Unimog when we had to get that going, and that one is still going to need it, so this is just going to get another new cylinder. Yeah, this should have been mounted first. Honestly, there is quite a lot of that going on where I'm putting parts onto this and then have to take them back off because I got the order wrong. But I suppose that's just what happens when these projects linger for so long. There we go. Done. Well, now we should have a functional clutch and even functional brakes. But before we can go ahead and check if this stuff actually works, we're gonna need to be able to run this for a little bit more than just 5 seconds. So we're gonna need some cooling for this engine. And also we're gonna have to finish mounting up the hydraulic lines because otherwise we're gonna be running this pump dry and we don't want to do that for too long. So I'm gonna be mounting the hydraulic lines and also the lines running down to the power steering cylinder. And before I go and put a radiator in here, I really want to finish up all the stuff on the front of the engine because the radiator just takes up all the space down here. So I'm gonna mount the fan and the rest of the belt drive and also the compressor unit. Not because the compressor is super important right now, but we do need that unit to finish up the hydraulics. All right, so really the last thing that we need to put in here before we can test this out is the radiator. Now this is not a new one. I took this out of the red Unimog 421. I've just shined it up a bit and also flushed it through, which turned out to be a good idea because there was a lot of mud coming out of this thing. Now there's a couple of reasons I'm using this one, mostly because the red Unimog, if we ever get to do that, it's gonna get something completely different anyway, so it's not gonna need it. But also, the one that was in here, if you remember, it was a bit mangled and also leaking a bit, but also it was not quite the right type. I don't know exactly what that one was out of. It did fit in here, just not quite right, but this should be the correct type. Alright, so just a couple of quick notes about my hose setup here, because this upper hose, I haven't ordered a new one yet, but I am going to. But I was just going to put the old one on here for now so we could run this little test. But somehow this has burst while it's just been laying around here. Don't really know how that happened, or it may have happened back when I took it off. I don't really remember, but regardless, I had to do a little improvised quick fix here just so we could run this for now. But this is going to be replaced, so don't worry. And also, these two pipes coming up down here, I have just looped those around. They were supposed to come all the way up and out to the bodywork and follow that around and be hooked up to the heater core over there. But I just simply didn't have enough hose to set that up, so that is also something that I'm going to be changing later on. Anyway, everything should be closed up now, so let's go ahead and put some fluids in this thing and see how much of this stuff is leaking. Let's just go ahead and start with some oil. These old Unimogs, they just use engine oil in the hydraulics. Well, nothing's leaking yet. Of course, that might just change once we get some pressure on it, but let's go ahead and put some water in. Still don't have anything that is particularly good for pouring water into one of these, so we're just gonna have to live with a little bit of spillage. All right, we are now full to the brim, and I don't see anything dripping anywhere. Those spots, that is just from me spilling when I was filling it up. But it seems like everything is holding tight for now. So let's go ahead and fire this thing up, and for the first time in a really long time, leave it running for a bit. Let's give this a try, see if this clutch actually works. Not quite. All right, so it looks like I have a couple of issues to sort out. First off, the clutch. I mean, the pedal and the hydraulics and all the stuff we just put together, that does seem to work just fine. But it feels like the clutch plate is sticking. It is rusted to the flywheel. Normally you can get that to let go simply by putting it into high gear, then holding down the brakes and the clutch and start up the engine. But for some reason, I cannot kick it over into high gear. I cannot move the shifter sideways like I'm supposed to. I suspect all of this stuff simply has a little bit of rust in it because the last thing I really did to all of this was to power wash everything very thoroughly, and it really hasn't driven since. So I'm thinking if it is just a slight bit of rust that is holding everything back, we might as well just try and drive it around a bit to see if we can get some oil sloshing around in that gearbox and maybe get things to loosen up. Honestly, I'm just making up excuses. I just really want to drive this thing, so let's go ahead and do it. I can drive it without clutch when we're just in low gears. Well, people, for some reason it got extremely windy as soon as I went outside, so I don't know how good the sound was on those recordings. But regardless, I was not going to go for a rally right now anyway, because there's still a lot of things that are not properly connected and the wheels are not even bolted on correctly, so we can't drive this too much just yet. This really was just a quick little test drive to see if all the things we've just done are working, and they seem to be. But neither the clutch nor the gears let go, so there is something binding up there. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, so we have something to look into with that. But even so, it was really nice to get this thing outside and just see it move around by itself again. Now, for those of you who might be new here, you can of course find the link to the previous videos down in the description, as well as a link for the playlist of the whole project. And by the way, I know that the videos have slowed down a little bit recently, but that is really just partly because I've had a lot of other stuff going on, and also it's just been unpleasantly cold. And if there's one thing I really don't want to do with frozen fingers, it's doing wiring and small fiddly stuff, which is exactly what I have going on with both of the current project vehicles. But despite this terrible wind, it does look like the spring is finally here, so hopefully we can get back into gear. Thank you all for watching along, and I'll see you in the next one.